Well, I am delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast is a very famous face. I'm sure anybody watching this will recognize immediately Edwina Currie. Now, Edwina originates from Liverpool, and I learnt just recently that you went to the same school as George Harrison and Paul McCartney from the Beatles, which was fascinating. And Edwina has spent much of her education in Liverpool and went on to university, but is obviously a very famous political figure and TV celebrity and writer. And so, Edwina, I'm really delighted to welcome you to the Godcast. How are you today?
Not too bad, not too bad today. I should say that back in the day, of course, we didn't have mixed schools in Britain. And so the boys, that was George Harrison and Paul McCartney, they went to the Liverpool Institute High School for boys. And I went the other side of the road to the Liverpool Institute High School for girls.
Right.
But there were two ways of getting into the boys' school. One was if you did further maths, high maths A level. That was not me. And the other was to join the student Christian movement, which I did. And we had some very good discussions. And it was the only way to get into the boys' school.
Okay. Did you meet Paul or George?
No. Paul is several years older than I am and had already left just as I was coming into the first years. And by the time I really got into them in 1982, I can remember my friend June running down the corridor and saying, "They're back, they're back." I said, "Who's back?" "The Beatles, they're back from Hamburg. We're going to see them tonight." It was great.
Wow, great times. And Edwina, I've just doing a little bit of research, noticed that you're planning to head back into the political arena. What's prompted your thought process with that?
Alex, it's rather weird. It's 24 years since I stood for political office. I was a councillor many years ago. That's how I got started. And I was approached to stand in the ward here where I live, the county council ward where I live, which covers all sorts of stuff that's very interesting, like adult care. I cared for my husband at home. He died of cancer last November. And so I know what being a full-time carer is all about. And we have, in this area, we have 10,000 people aged 75 or over. And we have a high proportion of elderly people. So adult care in a rural setting is actually tricky to do. And it's important that it's done well. Excuse the dogs, they have a view on everything, little monsters. But also, after John died, and you will know, having supported and advised many people in bereavement, you're left with a huge hole in your life. And after a while, you think, hey, I don't really just want to spend my time alone at home with no one to talk to, eating chocolate and watching Netflix. This is not me. So, about time you get out there and do something useful, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Edwina, I don't wish to pry about John's passing, but maybe you could offer a comment on grief and how you've coped or are coping with that. Has that been a difficult period of your life?
Oh, yes. And you grieve if somebody is poorly for a long time, you grieve before they die. Your half your head is thinking, we won't be able to do this again. This might be the last time we do this. You want to have a meaningful conversation. You want to go out to a restaurant or something, and you take photos. A lot of the time, I notice when I look back at my phone, thinking I may not get this opportunity again, because we knew he had cancer and we knew that it was not likely to be beaten this time. He'd beaten it before, but he was nearly 80. So that grieving starts, and then afterwards, I think you have to let yourself grieve. Whether you're a believer or not, whether you think someone has gone to a better place or not, whether you attach any kind of significance to their remains or to graves or whatever, you have to let yourself grieve. And even now, and we're not that far on, I'll have days when I really don't feel like doing very much. So I take the dogs for a walk, a long, long walk, and I let myself just enjoy being out in the open air. And I feel a bit better when I come back.
Yeah, I think it's a really good lesson and really wise words, Edwina. When my father died, I don't felt I ever grieved properly. And when my grandmother passed, I did exactly as you said. I afforded myself the time to just grieve and realize that it wasn't going to be over in a week and I should go back to normality. And I think a lot of people, I give that advice to a lot of people, just let that time pass. And
That's why I wear this, which is this month, March. It's a daffodil, and it's for a British charity called Marie Curie Cancer Care. And in fact, they look after all sorts of people with terminal illnesses, not just cancer. I used to be a trustee of the charity many years ago. And this is the month when we do most of our fundraising. And the main thing they try and do is ensure that people can spend their last days at home. And that means giving a lot of support to the family. It wasn't actually Marie Curie who looked after John. It was Hospice at Home, which is one of our local charities. But I've always paid into it on the basis that we never know when you're going to need this. And when you need it, you want it to be there. And that's why I'm very glad to support it.
And they are wonderful, the hospices, aren't they? A lot of people just think they're people who deal with death, but they deal with, they kind of make life bearable. And there's lots of activities and support. We have the Pendleside Hospice. It's a wonderful organisation. Edwina, let's move on to slightly cheerier subjects. Politics. It would perhaps be remiss of me on this day where the news is being hit with Meghan and Harry's stories. Have you got a view, or you prefer to kind of sit back and let it just pass by? I'm sure not.
Well, I gather that 12 million people in Britain watched it last night, which means about 50 million plus didn't. And I'm one of the 50 million plus. You know, this is a fight in a family being played out in public in ways that none of us want to see this happen with our own families. The old saying, least said, soonest mended, is very wise. Meghan is accusing everybody of behaving very badly, whereas the sources in the palace are saying, actually, that's not true. Everyone did their best. She thinks she wasn't made welcome in Britain. I think she was, hugely so, with enormous amount of money being spent on that wonderful wedding, which we all thoroughly enjoyed. Absolutely loved it. And to accuse people of racism is actually, it's not a light-hearted weapon. It's very, very hard, particularly when you think, we had Commonwealth Day and the Queen is the head of the Commonwealth. Most people in the Commonwealth are Black and they respect the Queen. And you've got to be careful about the handling of all of this. And I get the impression that, this young couple, how shall I put it charitably? This young couple who so hate publicity, who so want to shun the limelight, perhaps could have done a bit better than a 2-hour special with opera as a way of proving that.
Yes. Okay. Well, very diplomatically put, Edwina. Thank you. Can I ask you, Edwina, what if you recall the first kind of serious political issue that actually got your heart racing and got the hairs on the back of your neck standing up? For me, it was the miners' strike as a boy. I just followed it, religiously on the news. But what was it for you, Edwina?
I think the point at which I realised that I was going to have to try to be an MP was when I was a student. So I was at Oxford on full scholarship, surrounded by an awful lot of very posh people, and mostly men. I've always functioned in a world in which there weren't very many women. I've never been the only woman, but there's always been a heavy preponderance of blokes. And we had seen Czechoslovakia, which was in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, trying hard to come to terms with the modern world. Yeah, and they had something they called the Prague Spring. Young people in particular were very keen. They were reading Aristotle for the first time. And it all seemed to be going well with this sort of very positive face. And the Russians decided they weren't having anything like this. And on August the 21st, 1968, they sent the tanks in. and people fled. And some of my own college friends who have been there on holiday with Czech friends just bundled them in the car and drove for the border. And those poor people couldn't go back home for many, many years. And afterwards, when we came back after recess, a bunch of students all talking about this, and I said, you know, the students, they greeted the tanks with flowers. You know, it was flower power time. And if that had been me, I'd have been up on the building with the anti-tank weapon. And somebody said to me, no, Edwina, you should be the person to make sure that the anti-tank weapons are there. You should be a politician. And that goes into your head and you think, right, okay, maybe they're right. If so, how? It was not an easy ambition to have, I may say, because at that time, I think we had something like 10 women MPs in the House of Commons of 650. And indeed, when I got in, which was some years later, 1983, we still had only 23 women MPs in the House of Commons. Now we've got over 200, and it's great. But then it was a very macho place. I remember there was a guy standing behind me when I was listening to somebody making a speech, and he comes up to me and he tried to do a bit of goosing, you know? And I looked round at him, and I wore high heel shoes in those days. And I put my heel right into the middle of his foot. Nice. And you could hear him go,
oh dear.
Never happened again.
I'm sure it didn't. Edwina, we'll come back to the politics in a minute, but you were raised, obviously you're a Scouser, you were raised in Liverpool in an Orthodox Jewish family. Just give us a flavour of what that was like growing up, please.
Oh, well, God, Hashem, was like the old granddad. He was always there. He was a bit cantankerous and always had to be looked after. He set lots of rules, like you couldn't eat this and you couldn't do that. And a little bit, you couldn't go around with this person or that person. So I grew up in an atmosphere of us and them. But also, it was a traumatized environment. I mean, Liverpool had been heavily bombed during the Second World War, flattened. My grandfather had been killed in the Liverpool Blitz of the summer of 1941. My father lived in 4 different houses during the war. And they were all hit, with the final one being the direct hit that killed my grandfather. And then with the Holocaust afterwards, it was sad. And I learned the phrase as a small child: no good news comes out of Germany, with people who are trying to trace their families. Now, in that kind of atmosphere, there is joy still. And the joy came from the annual cycle of the various celebrations. This time of year is Purim, for example, the high holidays in the autumn when we had Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. But there was always a kind of feeling of, there was a burden of guilt with all this. Why were we the survivors? What had we done? What were the duties then placed on us? What were we supposed to do to justify our existence? And there was quite a strong sense of duty that you couldn't let Hitler win. So when I was a teenager and I wanted to have a Catholic boyfriend, there were, how shall I put it, intense discussions with my parents. And I tell you what, there was a bad downside to this, Alex, which is I learned to keep secrets. And I learned how to conduct my own activities. I was only a teenager, but you know how pure teenagers are, and how black and white they see everything. And I felt too limited, a bit restricted by being in a small community. And the Liverpool community was shrinking. People were leaving quite fast. It's only down to a few hundred, I think, now. But also, I quite fancied the big world out there. And everybody said to me, you'd be discriminated against. You faced a really hard time. And I thought, right, let's see what happens. And that didn't happen. So I felt quite emboldened from there onwards, whenever there was a barrier or an apparent barrier or a glass ceiling or whatever, to think, oh, well, we'll have a go. We'll see how we get on. We might succeed. You never know.
And was that ultimately with your parents' blessing, or was there a kind of it's our way or it's the highway, see you later, or?
The way I figured it was, if I wanted to leave Liverpool and really spread my wings, then the kindest way to do it was to go to university, which was pretty unusual for a girl anyway in those days. And to do it through a scholarship to Oxford meant they couldn't refuse, because it was going to be in the Liverpool Echo. and so it proved. And that meant that I left with honour. It was some time later, after I finished uni and started work in London and met the man I knew was going to be my future husband. And I said to him, my father's never going to accept you. And he said, that's medieval. I said, well, you go and talk to him. So bless him, Ray did, and that took some courage. And he came out of there after an hour and a half and said, well, you're right. Your father says I'd make a wonderful son-in-law, except I'm not Jewish. I said, right, okay. So he said, well, where should we get married? I said, well, where would your parents like us to get married? And he said, oh, that's easy, parish church in Devon. So that's what we did. Yeah. And I was made very, very welcome.
And did your parents attend that service?
No, my parents didn't. My brother didn't. It would be easy to say none of my family did, but in fact, that's not true. My uncle, my mum's older brother, had married out himself before the war. Absolutely lovely man, my Uncle Sam. And he contacted me and said, who's going to give you away? And I said, well, you know, I'm a grown woman, I can do it myself. He said, no. I'll come and do it. Where's it going to be? Devon. Right, when's the date? Yes, I'll be there, don't worry. And came with my Auntie Jean, and they did the honours. And he was such a lovely, lovely man. What a good thing to do, you know? So I didn't feel entirely alone. But roll on many, many years later to 2001, when I got married again, different fella. And I said to my mother, my dad had long since died, I said to my mother, you're coming to this one, you know? And she looked John deep in the eyes, and he had dark eyes and dark hair. And she said to him, oh, I think you've got Jewish blood, John. I'm coming to this one. And she brought her sister, and her sister brought her daughter as kind of, you know, moral backup.
Yeah.
And we just had to make sure they didn't eat the pork pate.
Edwina, I've got to ask, did that scar your first marriage? Was that scarred by your parents not attending, or did it get resolved, or was there always a sadness there?
It never got resolved. My dad died 4 years later. Yes, 1975. We married in 71. He died in 75, quite suddenly, of a heart attack. And he never got to see his granddaughter. But that was also because, you know, we were both very stubborn people. And on one occasion, I had brought my baby up to my brother's. We got reconciled very quickly, still friends. And my shush dogs, hush, my father brought, we've got to deliver it, Amazon. There we go. Can I just take a minute out to do this?
We just had a very brief interlude there. It was Amazon parcel that caused the disruption, and so we'll carry on. You can tell this is a real life podcast and video. Edwina, you were telling us about being reconciled or not with your father.
Well, it never really happened, and that's because we were both very stubborn. I'm very much my father's daughter. He died 4 years after Ray and I got married. And he never saw his little granddaughter, who is now 47. And it could have happened. But I mean, for example, I'd taken the baby up to see my brother, because we were very rapidly became friends again, and we still are. And my dad brought mum to the house to come and say hello. And he stayed in the car. He wouldn't come out of the car. And if I had been a better person, I would have picked the baby up in my arms and I'd have marched out of the car and I'd have said, "Here, Dad, here's your granddaughter." And I don't know what would have happened. But I thought to myself, do you know what? It's his loss. And there am I. I'm a happily married young woman with a baby, gorgeous baby. I don't want to put that equilibrium at risk by having a row with my dad out in the street where everybody can see it. And I never went out, and he died not long after that. And it's really very, very sad. My mother, however, lived long enough. She was nearly 93 when she passed away. She lived long enough to become a very dear friend as well as my mother. And in fact, in many ways, her best years were in her 70s and 80s. She worked till she was 75. So I'm trying to sort of copy what she got up to. She used her brain all her life. She only had 2 days of illness before she passed away.
Right.
That'll suit me.
Yeah, absolutely. Edwina, I very much enjoyed watching the series Pilgrimage, which you did, and I interviewed Dom Jolly from that show as well. And you know, quite kind of relaxed about faith matters now. Where are you with your faith? I know you said prior to this that you have Psalm 21 on the entrance to one of your doors. Just explain that to us.
I have we have an extension to the house. We live in an old cottage, as you can see. John is still here. I live in a 400-year-old cottage, 3-bedroom cottage, little stone cottage with thick walls. And when we bought it, we downsized. And we, planning for the future, you have to do this. And then we realized it was too small because we like to have parties and there was nowhere for the party to go. Right. So we knocked down the garage and we built an entertainment room, kind of like an old front room, something that you keep tidy and nice. You only use it for special events. Yeah. We have all sorts of events there. My favorite is Cakes and Ale, which we have as a Sunday afternoon once a year, and usually on 12th night, actually, right. Just as the end of the Christmas celebrations. So we have a mural painted on it. We call it the Jungle Room because the money came from being in I'm a Celebrity.
I was wondering why.
Nobody flies to Australia for nothing, let me tell you. So it's got a jungle painted on the wall, and amongst the leaves is woven, "I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth." And we are surrounded here in the Peak District by hills. Any window you look out of in the cottage, you're looking at the hills. Yeah. So it says a lot to me.
That's a really nice story. And I love how you've called it the Jungle Room. That's wonderful. Let's just get back to a bit of politics. Just in terms of just staying on the theme of faith, I was wondering, Edwina, what you thought about religion in British politics is almost, to me, it seems a bit of a taboo subject. But in America, it seems kind of at the heart of the subject. I was just wondering why you think that is, because I do know that there are a lot of MPs, I've spoken to them, who are Christians and who worship and who pray before Westminster. Why do you think that politics is not kind of full of religion in the UK?
There's a kind of embarrassment in Britain about saying that you're religious. I remember Alistair Campbell saying when Tony Blair was asked whether he had prayed with President George W. Bush, and Campbell said, "We don't do God." And
Edwina, let me just tell you that Alistair Campbell's done the Godcast, and in his opening gambit is, "I don't do God, but I do the Godcast," which has given me a great marketing strapline. But sorry for interrupting.
It's very odd, actually, because in Britain, the Queen is the head of the Church of England. She's the head of one of the important churches. And in America, the Constitution says that Congress shall make no law respecting religion. And yet America is more vividly and quite aggressively religious in many ways, with the evangelicals in particular taking a very strong, rather right-wing line, a rather Trumpian line, which I suspect would have Jesus scratching his head a bit about, it would not be, in my judgment, it would not be his way to be very strongly one way or the other. Anyway, in this country, we've become much more secular. Particularly the Christian communities have seen substantial declines. The Church of England has done so. Evangelicals have been rising. Catholics are still doing very well. And other religions like Islam have been vibrant and in fact are changing, I think, in many ways to accommodate the needs of a British and British-born population. It's getting easier to talk about God. It went really down a long way. But I regularly broadcast on the BBC with Mohammed Rafiq, who is a leading light of the Rochdale Muslim community. And we can often talk about issues with the background of a religion. Now, you'll be the first to recognize, I'm sure, that there's a difference between religion and belief. You can be part of a religion, many Jewish people are, for example, without necessarily having very strong beliefs or without necessarily wanting to turn to God all the time. That becomes more cultural. I've still got that. I still have that very strongly. I still have that feeling that a family is the best place to rear a child, any kind of family. That family means looking after each other, even if you can't stand each other. That extends to your community, extends to your street. There's an element of contributing as much as you can, and not just demanding as much as you can. And that if fate or God or fortune makes you wealthy, then you have a bigger obligation to contribute. There's a whole range of moral values that come out of religion that are enormously useful. And it helps to know where they come from. So my 15-year-old granddaughter, for example, doesn't know anything about religion. And I find myself constantly having to explain concepts and ideas which all stem from that source. If she'd had a religious upbringing, she wouldn't be so puzzled about it. And there's a coherence that I think is missing from the kind of new agey stuff.
Yeah.
And the big difference for me, the big divide there for me is actually, do you do your duty and see yourself as part of a community? Or do you expect everything to be happening for you? And there are no religions in which everything happens for you, it seems to me. But then other people would have different interpretations.
Yes. I think it's interesting what you said about community. I'm my curate, we're affiliated to a church school where there's quite a good, strong religious teaching. But we're encouraged by the non-church schools, the secular schools, to come in. And it just feels like they're actually craving a bit of religion, not indoctrination, but just because it's not really on the curriculum as it used to be. And what I have noticed is that children really enjoy it. They like hearing Bible stories of Noah and the Ark and Jonah and the whale, and it provokes lots of questions. So I think it's I always say to kids that even if you're not religious, it's a wonderful subject. It's very enriching, and there's so much to it, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, it works in other ways as well. Not long ago, a couple of years ago, I went on a real pilgrimage that was arranged by the Uniting Reformed Church Methodist minister here. And he needed a certain number to make the group viable. And I said to John, you stay here, I'm going. And they went to the Holy Land. They did Israel and Jordan, which no Jewish visitor normally does. We got to Jerash, we got to Petra. Oh my God, fabulous. And for me, it was the most magical experience, but also to be going through the old city of Jerusalem, through the city of King David, and to see it from a Christian viewpoint. It made the whole thing much more sacred. And then suddenly I could see it. And I hope this is not sacrilegious, but I could see it from Jesus' viewpoint. And we actually followed the path down from the hill right down into the old city, walking, and it's very narrow and has quite steep sides. And you could imagine him doing this with all the crowds cheering, knowing that he was probably going to his death.
Yeah.
And even now, it makes the hair rise on the back of my head. And to stand in the places where he stood with believer Christians who were not flailing around or anything, but they were deeply moved by it. You could not help but be touched by that. It was an extraordinary experience.
Do you know what, Edwina, you're a great advert, because I'm leading a pilgrimage to the Holy Land next year with a friend of mine. When we were there last January, just before lockdown, and you talking got the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as well, because it is an extraordinary place, and to walk along the Walk of Sorrows is just an incredible experience. Yeah. Edwina, let's just move on a little bit. And, you know, all the stuff in the press, the John Major stuff and the eggs, I don't really, you know, to be honest, I'm not bothered with all that now. But something I am interested, because I think it's interesting and it's important and it's coming up in the church. I noticed that you were a driving force in calling for debate in the House of Commons about reducing the age of the consent of age for gay relationships. And we're about to face this huge debate, discussion in the church about whether gay couples should get married. Where are you on that debate, Edwina? It's very controversial. It's very difficult, very sensitive. Where do you stand?
I think I start and finish in a way in the same place, which is we're all God's children. We are made in the likeness of God, all of us. And we behave in ways, the choices that we make are those of moral behavior, of how we behave to others. But as I understand it, our sexuality is probably not something over which we have much choice. I remember sitting at a dinner table with some friends when we started really talking through the inequalities and the discrimination that faced gay friends. And one of them said to me, Edwina, how old were you when you started to fancy human beings in trousers with dangly things, you know? And I said, oh, about 13. And he said, well, so was I. And at that point you think, right, okay. This is a world I need to try and understand. And why don't I just understand it as we're all human beings? There's no us and them in this. And at that point, you suddenly realize that if the law said this person can make their choices at 16 and this person has to wait till they're 21, this is wrong. This is wrong. I look at all discrimination and I see something wrong there. The effects can be wrong. I mean, the effects of the discriminatory legislation against gay men was that people got murdered, people got persecuted, they lost their jobs, they were traumatized, they committed suicide, awful. And if you add HIV/AIDS to that mixture, in the 80s, it was absolutely toxic. And my feeling was, you know, we really want to recalibrate what we talk about as normal. And normal is people behaving well towards each other. That's what we should have as normal, not people behaving badly to each other. And so we sat down, and what they were really interested in doing at that time was getting rid of Clause 28, which banned teaching about homosexuality in schools. And I said, I think there's something more significant, deep-seated, to do with the very concept of a person. And that's to do with the point at which you are old enough to make your own decisions and take charge of your life. At 16 in Britain, a young man can marry. At 16, then he could join the armed forces. He still needed parent signature now. But at 16, he can't decide who he wants to sleep with if he's gay. And in fact, if he does sleep with somebody, then he's creating a criminal offense and somebody could go to jail. Which leads them over to blackmail and everything. That's the issue. That's the fundamental issue that has people on the left talking about equality and people on the right, like me, talking about freedom. That's the unifying one. And they said, well, who's going to lead it? And they looked at me and said, Edwina, you're a woman. You're a married woman with 2 daughters. Nobody can say you're doing it for yourself. And I looked round, and that's the point at which you take a step forward, Alex, and you say, all right, I'll do it. And then I said, it's a good story, this. Then I said, look, it's got to be all party. So who do you want as your seconder? Some significant Labour figure. And I said, I want Neil Kinnock. And they said, oh, he won't. Why won't he? Well, he comes from South Wales and he's got 2 sons. And I said, that's exactly why he should do it. And I took him to tea at a nearby hotel, away from prying eyes. And I fed him tea and rock cakes, and I lectured him on equality. And bless him, he came forward and he did this, to everybody's surprise. We didn't get down to equality that night. We got it from 21 to 18. And what I think we did was we changed attitudes. One of the key things we did was I dispatched people to go and talk to significant figures in their own communities. So we sent a well-known Catholic to go and talk to Basil Hume, Cardinal Basil Hume. And bless his cotton socks, he put out a wonderful statement based roughly in the way that I've just described about humanity, and that we shouldn't make judgments as if we were gods, because we're not. And we did very, very well. We did well with that. And it was then only a matter of time before equality was achieved. When it comes to marriage, I'm a fan of marriage. I think that's how children should be brought up. And marriage means promising each other to do their utmost to love and care and cherish in all the old words, the old 1,000-year-old words. Absolutely wonderful. I failed in my first marriage, but I was married for over 20 years. My second husband failed in his first marriage. It's really quite funny. When he asked me to marry him, I said, I can't, I'm still married to somebody else. And he said, oh, you'll get divorced. It's easy, I've done that. And his second marriage ended when his wife died of cancer after 25 years. So he had a very well-lived life. Yeah. But I would rather people be married than be promiscuous. I would rather people be thinking long-term and offering love to one very special person, if that can be arranged, and now it can.
Do you know, Edwina, just listening to that, it's really quite inspiring. I recently received an email from a gay priest, female, who was like, just, I'm really tired. I don't know if I can keep doing this. And I kind of responded by saying that you need to keep going, because you're doing it not just for yourself, but for people who've done it before, and thinking about what you've just said. I mean, you who have created a pathway to where she is with all those struggles that she's facing at the moment, but with faith and good intentions, that will open up more pathways for more people. And I think it's really important, particularly if gay people are watching this, that you keep doing that, because there are people inside and outside the church that are really, really rooting for you. And I just want to thank you for what you've done. It's really important.
I think we forget also how much pain is involved in secrecy and conflict. One of my friends back in the 90s was a gay priest. He was in the Church of England. He's very high up in the Church of England. And we got talking about this. And I said to him, well, why are you on your own? What is the reasoning behind? And he just looked so sad. And he said, I had a partner for 17 years who died of AIDS, and I could not mourn in public.
It's terrible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just let that sink in for people. That's, I mean, I have this issue with physical contact for gay people who are, in the church. Who are kind of, anyway, we better not go there. I just want to, I don't have an awful lot of time. It's absolutely whittled by, but we've done a bit of politics, done a bit of faith. You've had an incredible career. You've published endless number of books, Edwina. I know you do cruise ships because my mum was telling me how wonderful you were. She met you on a cruise ship. But you know, I'm a celeb and Strictly Come Dancing. There, you know, you've got a back route, you've got an entertainment route paid for by that Joy. But that must have been experiences, I guess.
Well, you've forgotten I won Celebrity Mastermind.
Of course.
Twice. Twice. And I've also done Come Dine With Me twice, and I won it the second time. You learn from the first time, don't do anything terribly complicated, but do what you do really well and lay on some entertainment, and that way they will vote for you. These are wonderful experiences. I mean, British TV is magic. Love it. I'm now, this year, I'll be 75. And it feels good actually to be busy and to be working. And if we're being practical, you know, I might have another 15 or even 20 years. You look at the Queen, and she's still going strong. You kind of shrink a bit. I never understood what my mother meant when she said that she was growing down by a cow's, like a cow's tail, but I do now, right? And I have lockdown hair and it's grey as anything. I'm turning into an English sheepdog. But there's an element there. There's a little political decision there, Alex, which is I want to celebrate this. I had quite an argument with a friend of mine who's 86 who said, don't tell everybody how old you are. And I said, but I'm a baby boomer. The year I was born, 1 million people were born in Britain, and most of us are still here. And the numbers of elderly, which have grown dramatically because of improvements in the health service, people don't die of heart attacks anymore, they don't die of strokes. That number is about to be augmented by the 1 million of my lot and the nearly 1 million of my brother's lot coming along. We are going to dominate the world. So why shouldn't I be a very proud member of it, even in a way a representative of it? And it's important because every story that's ever on telly is all about, if it's ever about elderly people, it's about a care home or it's about Alzheimer's. It's about people needing help and degenerating and becoming decrepit, all of which is true. But most of us aren't like that most of the time. And we contribute to society enormously. We contribute as volunteers and we contribute as taxpayers. That really gets my, you know, anyone talks about taxpayers being the young generation, pardon me, we pay tax quite heavily and we are contributing and active members of society. So here you go. I've turned from a little old biddy into Beau de Seer. Have you noticed?
You know what, you could people of a certain generation and a vintage can impart an awful lot of wisdom. And you know, as I get older, I'm 51, I love listening to stories from older people. I love talking to older people. And you are clearly effervescent, and you're absolutely alive, Edwina, and why should that not be celebrated and shared? And if that means a return to the political arena, then you know, fantastic. Maybe not Prime Minister, you know, maybe, you know, but yeah. Edwina, it's been absolutely a joy talking to you. It's been fascinating. I could talk for another hour and a half, but I think 45 minutes is what our listeners like. But I do have one final question. It's one question I ask to everybody on the Godcast is, have you been to Burnley?
Have I been to Burnley? I've been to most places, probably.
That was a very political answer, Edwina.
Well, I get asked to go, when times were normal, I would get asked to go to speak in all sorts of places. Burnley's not that far away. It's just the other side of Manchester. I live in the Peak District. If I get another invitation, let's be diplomatic. If I get another invitation to go to Burnley to do something useful, then I'd be very happy to accept.
Well, we may well take you up on that, Edwina. Edwina, thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your time. It's much appreciated. And we do send our love to you from Burnley. We're not far away from the homeland of Liverpool either. And I just want to thank you for coming on the Godcast. And for anybody who'd like to watch any more videos, then just go to thegodcast.co.uk where you'll find more wonderful interviews like this one. But for now, Edwina, thanks for your time and many blessings from Burnley. Bye-bye.
God bless.